You see Made in China everywhere. But what if we told you the world's manufacturing giant is quietly heading toward an economic storm? It's 2025. You're standing in Beijing, China, watching one of the two giants of the world's economy rise to very high levels. Skyscrapers and factories stretch from Shanghai to Shenzhen. Tech giants and banks like Tencent, Alibaba, and ICBC have world-beating market values. The myth of the Chinese dragon swallowing the sun in an eclipse is becoming more and more real. The country's manufacturing sector handles about 20% of global exports, and its companies rank among the world's largest market capitalizations. It feels as if the dragon can't be controlled. But the impressive-looking statistics are dull in reality. Despite China's size, its GDP per capita in 2025 stands at a mere $13,688, which is barely a fraction of America's $89,105. The Chinese middle class is massive, but the average income remains not very high. Skyscrapers, vast infrastructure builds, and state-sponsored industrial growth created the illusion of progress, until you realized that there's something strange. Wages seem to be stalling, stock markets slowing. A once super growth is showing bad signs of fading into a collapse. So what went wrong? This is China's story. After 1949, China was war-torn and impoverished. Decades of a planned economy left factories and farms devastated. Then, in 1978, Deng Xiaoping's reforms sent China speeding toward markets and exports, cheap labor and massive investment that attracted one of history's greatest rises. China's GDP doubled every 8 years and lifted nearly 800 million people out of poverty. The world witnessed cities like Shenzhen grow from fishing villages into industrial heavyweights. By the 2000s, China had overtaken Germany, France, and Japan to become the world's second largest economy. Its exports surged too. China became the world's workshop, accounting for roughly 18% of global manufactured exports. Highways and high-speed rails, not to mention the new factories, gave the once poor country a new image. Well into the 2010s, China kept on powering ahead. It had joined the World Trade Organization in 2001 and was hosting events like the 2008 Olympics, which increased pride. Chinese brands and consumers also began to globalize. Louis Vuitton and Apple stores thrived in Beijing, while Chinese buyers snapped up foreign firms. The government sent cheap credit into infrastructure and industry, and Chinese factories produced everything from iPhones to steel. Sure, China's public debt increased, but high savings and great exports seemed to make the growth increase. In fact, Chinese leaders adopted a 5% GDP growth target, even though meeting it in 2024 required about $1 trillion trade surplus. Basically, with 1/5 of the world's population and the largest manufacturing base, China seemed to be an unstoppable economic force. Yet by the late 2010s, the underlying imbalances started revealing themselves. The real estate sector in particular had become a bubble. At its peak, housing and construction contributed up to 25 to 29% of China's GDP. The home prices and land sales climbed rapidly as developers borrowed heavily. And then in 2020, Beijing imposed 3 red lines on debt, suddenly exposing long-term excessive borrowing. Later, in 2021, major builders like Evergrande, which was once the world's most indebted developer, neared default. Things went further downhill. By October 2021, the National Bureau of Statistics reported home prices falling month on month in more than half of China's cities, the first decline in many years. The country's new home sales value went down 23% through August 2024, with Goldman Sachs warning that $2.1 trillion would be needed to fix housing and complete unfinished projects. Meanwhile, Bloomberg estimated roughly 60 million unsold apartments sit in inventory. That's 4 years' supply without government aid. As a result, China's previously great property industry saw a collapse. Even its share of GDP fell from about 14.5% in 2021 to 12.9% in 2024. And this crash drained household wealth and also affected the banking sector. At this point, economists are pointing to several deep-seated problems dragging down China's economy. First, the aforementioned property and debt meltdown. China's growth for years was being influenced by real estate speculation, and then the new home sales ended badly, at about 23% as of June 2025. What's more, the developers defaulted, along with the mortgage demand getting weaker. Even land sales, which were an important source of government revenue, collapsed. The housing sector's share of GDP ended up shrinking. Despite bailing out some projects, the local governments and banks had to end up holding huge debts from expired projects. This credit binge that was once the source of growth has now become a heavy burden, dragging progress. Not many know that a large share of China's industry, since it is a communist country, is actually state-controlled or semi-private. This means that many unprofitable firms stay alive just by government support. For instance, the 2010 to 2018 loss making SOEs nearly doubled, going from around 41,000 to a shocking 76,000 approximately. They actually accounted for about 82% of corporate debt in 2020. But instead of allowing them to fail, the government often props up these zombie companies with bailouts and cheap loans. Even the Overseas Belt and Road, or BRI, projects are now viewed as an extension of this support for heavy industries. This allegedly crony system basically misallocates resources and suppresses competition, creating some serious inefficiencies in the economy. China, a country known for its population, is actually facing a decline in the future, which automatically translates to a loss of human resources. It's essentially a time bomb since the decades of the one-child policy alongside rising urban living costs have caused birth rates to crash. In fact, over 21% of its population at about 297 million was over the age of 60 in 2023. Really, the working population peaked in 2010 and has since kept shrinking, and unlike other developed countries, China doesn't have much of an immigrant workforce to offset this crisis. Fewer young people now means lower domestic demand and a tight labor market, both of which mean that the growth will slow down. And a rapidly aging society also means that the number of retirees is increasing each year, placing more burden on pension and healthcare funds. Recent years have seen China's regulatory strictness rattling businesses, like the 2020 to 2022 crackdown that affected tech companies, like Ant Group's IPO being halted, or Alibaba losing up to 75% of its peak market value. The unpredictable rule changes affected industries from technology and education to property, subjected to sudden new taxes or bans, with giants like LinkedIn and Yahoo deciding to withdraw from China in 2021. The situation now is different from the past. China can't suddenly flood the economy with stimulus, as the public debt has climbed to about 100% of the GDP. While the government did raise its budget deficit to a record of around 4% of GDP, it has been reluctant to start a new spending wave. However, lots of support has gone to bailing out local governments and bond markets. Although China has cut its interest rates, inflation being near zero sets a delicate balance, as it can't let rates fall too low without hurting the bank's profits, causing a liquidity trap. Even if it injects cash into the market, people simply save it, on top of private spending being very weak with household savings at one of the highest in the world. China is now contending with deflationary pressures and debt overhang. Pushing export volumes at the expense of prices is a dangerous game, and China's leaders seem keenly aware of the risks. They've repeatedly said the goal is to move toward a modernized economy with innovation, consumption, and efficiency. But without more profound reforms, like letting its inefficient firms fail and opening borders to foreign talent, China will become stagnant. Simply repeating what worked in the past won't be enough. The statistics are stark. Some estimates suggest China's official GDP may be up to 10% smaller than reported, all due to hidden debts and overcapacity. The dragon may have awakened the world's attention, but now it faces the hard test of trying a new strategy to avoid the Incarian fall. China must either adapt its growth model or risk letting decades of prosperity slip away.